The door rattled violently, the sound echoing through the quiet house like a thunderclap. "Open this door before I break it down." His voice was sharp, filled with anger that sent chills down her spine. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. "Please let me rest," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so tired. Just let me rest." But he wasn't listening. The banging continued, each strike against the door making her flinch. She knew what would happen if she opened it. She knew what always happened. But she also knew he wouldn't stop until she did. Tears streamed down her face as she stood, her legs feeling like they might give way. With a shaky hand she turned the lock. The door flew open, and there he stood, his eyes blazing with fury. "What is wrong with you?" he demanded, stepping into the room. She backed away, but he grabbed her arm, his grip tight enough to leave bruises. "You're my wife. You don't get to decide when and when not to do your duty." Her mind raced, her body trembling under his hold. But something inside her snapped. "Enough!" she screamed, shoving him away with all her strength. "I am not a machine. I am not a toy. I am a human being." For a moment he looked stunned, as if the thought had never crossed his mind. And in that moment she knew she couldn't stay here anymore. Before we dive deeper into this gripping story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel to help us grow. Your support means the world to us, and we thank you in advance for being part of this journey. Amara sat still as the makeup artist added the final touches to her face. The bright gold-trimmed wedding gown felt heavy on her body, but not as heavy as the weight in her chest. The chatter of her bridesmaids filled the room, but their excitement felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, but as she stared at herself in the mirror, she could only see a stranger. "Amara, smile na," her best friend Lola nudged her. "You're getting married to one of the most eligible bachelors in Lagos. Do you know how many girls wish they were in your shoes?" Amara forced a smile. She knew Lola meant well, but if only she understood. Emeka was a wealthy, handsome man from a respected family. Their parents had arranged the marriage, believing it to be a perfect match. She had barely known him before their engagement, just a few brief meetings, mostly in the presence of family. He had seemed charming enough, confident in a way that made people admire him, but something had felt off. He had a way of looking at her that made her skin prickle, like she was something to be owned, something to be possessed. "Time to go," her mother's voice rang out, full of pride. "Don't keep your husband waiting." Amara swallowed hard as she stood. The wedding procession began, and as she walked toward the man who would become her husband, she wondered if she was walking toward happiness or into a cage. She had no idea how soon she would find out. The wedding was a grand affair, the kind that left people talking for weeks. Guests filled the hall, dressed in their best, while the live band played high life music that made the older guests sway in their seats. The air smelled of jollof rice, grilled fish, and expensive perfume. Amara sat beside Emeka on the elevated couple's table. Her face stretched in a polite smile as well-wishers approached with gifts and advice. Emeka's hand rested possessively on hers, his grip firm, as if he were afraid she would slip away. Every time he turned to look at her, there was something in his gaze that unsettled her, a burning intensity that felt too much too soon. When it was time for the dance, Emeka pulled her close, his hands gripping her waist tightly. He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. "I can't wait to have you all to myself tonight," he murmured. Amara's stomach twisted. She nodded, unsure of what to say. Hours later, they arrived at Emeka's house, a lavish mansion in one of Lagos's most expensive estates. The moment they stepped inside, Emeka shut the door and turned to her with a hungry look. "I've waited long enough," he said, reaching for her. Amara's heart pounded. She wasn't naive. She knew what was expected of her. But there was something almost desperate in the way Emeka touched her, something that made her skin crawl. That night she barely slept. Each time she tried to rest, Emeka pulled her back, as though her body was his personal playground. By the time morning came, she was exhausted, sore, and confused. Maybe it was just wedding night excitement, she told herself. Maybe things would calm down. But deep down she feared they wouldn't. Amara hoped things would settle into a normal rhythm, but by the end of the first week, she realized she was wrong. Emeka was insatiable. Morning, afternoon, night. He wanted her constantly, as if her body existed solely for his pleasure. She had no time to rest, no time to breathe. He would wake her in the middle of the night. His hands already roaming, his need urgent. Even when she was exhausted, even when she begged him to let her sleep, he would chuckle and say, "A good wife must always satisfy her husband." At first, she tried to reason with him. She told him she needed time to adjust, that she was tired, that she felt drained. But Emeka would only smile, dismissing her words with a kiss. "You'll get used to it," he whispered. Days turned into weeks, and Amara began to dread the nights. She avoided eye contact with Emeka during the day, afraid that even the slightest glance would spark his desire again. But it didn't matter. He always wanted more. She became a shadow of herself. Dark circles formed under her eyes, her once bright laughter disappeared, and her energy drained away. When she went to visit her mother, she thought she would finally find some relief. "Mama, I'm tired," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't think I can do this." Her mother frowned. "Do what?" "This marriage." "Emeka." Amara hesitated, unsure how to explain what she was going through. Her mother sighed. "My dear, marriage is not always easy. A woman must endure. Your father was the same when we got married, but with time things calm down. Just give him what he wants, and he will love you more." Amara felt her stomach sink. There would be no help from her mother. As she sat in the car on the way home, staring at the quiet streets of Lagos, a single thought settled in her mind. She was trapped in the dimly lit cafe. Her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of tea she hadn't touched. Across from her, Lola leaned forward, her brow furrowed with concern. "Amara, you look terrible," she said softly. "What's going on?" Amara hesitated, her eyes darting around the cafe to make sure no one was listening. She had chosen this place because it was quiet, tucked away from the prying eyes of Lagos's bustling streets. But even here, she felt exposed, as if Emeka's shadow loomed over her wherever she went. "I don't sleep anymore," Amara finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Lola's eyes widened. "What do you mean? Emeka, does he?" Amara shook her head, cutting her off. "It's not force, but it's like I don't have a choice. He won't take no for an answer. He acts like my body belongs to him, and nothing else matters." Lola sighed, her fingers drumming against the table. "Amara, this is serious. Have you talked to him?" "I tried," Amara said, letting out a bitter laugh. "He just tells me it's my duty as a wife." Lola leaned back, her expression hardening. "This isn't right. You need to speak to someone. A therapist, a lawyer, anybody." Amara bit her lip, her eyes filling with tears. "You know my family won't support that. My mother already told me to endure." A heavy silence stretched between them. Lola reached across the table, placing a hand over Amara's. "Then what will you do?" Amara didn't know the answer. But what she did know was that she couldn't take this much longer. Something had to change before she lost herself completely. That night, Amara lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Emeka's arm was draped over her, his breathing deep and steady. She held her breath, listening, making sure he was truly asleep before she gently slid out of bed. She had packed a small bag earlier, hiding it under the guest room bed. She moved silently, her heart pounding as she grabbed it and slipped on her sandals. Just as she reached the door, the bed creaked. She froze. Emeka stirred, mumbled something in his sleep, then turned to the other side. Amara didn't wait. She unlocked the door and stepped into the hallway, forcing herself to move quickly. The night air was cool against her skin as she walked out of the house. The gate was unlocked. Lola had bribed the guard earlier. Her friend was waiting in a car down the street. As soon as Amara got in, Lola hit the accelerator. They drove in silence for a while before Lola finally spoke. "Are you okay?" Amara exhaled, staring out at the dark streets of Lagos. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I'm free." A week later, Amara sat in a small apartment in Abuja, far from the reach of Emeka and their families. The weight on her chest had not fully lifted, but for the first time in months, she could breathe. She had filed for legal separation with the help of a women's support center. Emeka's family tried to cover the scandal, offering to fix things, but Amara refused. She was done being silenced. One afternoon her phone rang. It was her mother. "You have disgraced us," her mother said, her voice thick with disappointment. "Do you think marriage is easy? Do you think you'll ever find another man after this?" Amara swallowed, gripping the phone tightly. "I would rather be alone than spend my life as someone's prisoner." Her mother sighed. "What will people say?" "I don't care anymore," Amara said, her voice steady. She ended the call and stared out the window. For the first time in a long time she felt peace. She had survived, and now she was ready to start over, on her own terms. But Emeka wasn't ready to let her go. One evening, as Amara returned to her apartment, she noticed a car parked across the street. The windows were tinted, but she could feel eyes watching her. Her heart raced as she quickened her steps, fumbling with her keys to unlock the door. Just as she stepped inside, the car door opened. "Amara," a familiar voice called out. She froze. It was Emeka. Amara's heart stopped as she turned to face Emeka. He stood a few feet away, his expression unreadable in the dim light of the street lamp. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them felt heavy, charged with tension. "Emeka," she said, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" He took a step closer, his hands in his pockets, his demeanor calm but with an undercurrent of something darker. "I came to talk," he said, his voice low. "You left without a word. Do you know how worried I was? How worried our families are?" Amara's grip tightened on the doorframe. "Worried? You weren't worried about me when I begged you to let me rest. You weren't worried about me when I told you I couldn't keep going like that." Emeka's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he glanced around the quiet street, then back at her. "Can we talk inside? This isn't a conversation for the street." Amara hesitated. She didn't want to let him in, but she also knew he wouldn't leave until he said what he came to say. Reluctantly, she stepped aside, allowing him to enter. The apartment felt smaller with him in it, the walls closing in as he stood in the center of the living room. Amara stayed near the door, her arms crossed protectively over her chest. "Say what you came to say," she said, her voice firm despite the fear bubbling inside her. Emeka sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Amara, I know things haven't been easy between us, but running away isn't the solution. We're married. We made vows. You can't just walk out on that." "Vows?" Amara's voice rose, her anger breaking through. "What about the vows you made to love and cherish me? You treated me like I was nothing more than a possession, Emeka. You didn't care about how I felt, what I needed. All you cared about was what you wanted." Emeka's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, she saw the anger she had come to fear. But then he took a deep breath, his expression softening. "I didn't realize how much I was hurting you," he said, his voice quieter now. I thought this was how marriage was supposed to be. My father always said a man should be the head of the household, that a wife should submit to her husband in all things." Amara shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "That's not love, Emeka. That's control. And I won't live like that anymore." Emeka stepped closer, his hands reaching out as if to touch her, but she flinched, stepping back. He dropped his hands, his expression pained. "I don't want to lose you, Amara. I'm willing to change. I'll go to counseling, whatever it takes. just come home." Amara stared at him, her heart aching with a mix of emotions. Part of her wanted to believe him, to hope that things could be different. But the other part, the part that had endured months of pain and exhaustion, knew better. "I can't," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't go back to that life, Emeka. I'm sorry." For a long moment Emeka said nothing. Then he nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "If that's your decision, then I'll respect it," he said quietly. "But know this, I'm not giving up on us. Not yet." With that, he turned and walked out of the apartment, leaving Amara standing alone in the silence. The next few days were a blur. Amara couldn't shake the feeling that Emeka's visit was just the beginning. She jumped at every sound, every knock on the door, fearing it was him coming back to drag her home. Lola came over often, bringing food and offering comfort. "You did the right thing," she said one evening as they sat on the couch. "You stood up for yourself. That takes courage." Amara nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. What if he doesn't stop Lola? What if he keeps coming back? Lola squeezed her hand. "Then we'll handle it. You're not alone in this, Amara. I'll be here every step of the way." Amara smiled, grateful for her friend's support. But deep down, she knew this wasn't over. A week later, Amara received a letter in the mail. It was from Emeka's lawyer, demanding that she return to the marital home or face legal action. The letter claimed that her departure had caused emotional distress to Emeka and that her refusal to reconcile was a breach of their marital vows. Amara's hands shook as she read the words. She had hoped Emeka would let her go, but now it was clear he was willing to fight to keep her trapped. She called the Women's Support Center, her voice trembling as she explained the situation. The counselor listened patiently, then assured her that they would help. "You have rights, Amara," the counselor said firmly. "No one can force you to stay in a marriage that's harming you. We'll fight this together." Amara felt a glimmer of hope, but it was overshadowed by fear. She knew this was just the beginning of a long, difficult battle. The next morning, Amara received another visitor. This time it wasn't Emeka. It was his mother. Chapter 4. Amara opened the door to find Emeka's mother standing on the threshold, her expression a mix of concern and disapproval. Dressed in an elegant wrapper and headscarf, she carried herself with the poise of a woman used to commanding respect. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Amara stepped aside, allowing her to enter. "Good afternoon, Mama," Amara said quietly, her voice tinged with unease. Emeka's mother nodded, her eyes scanning the small apartment before settling on Amara. "Amara, my child, we need to talk." Amara gestured to the couch, her heart pounding. She had always respected Emeka's mother, but now, with everything that had happened, she wasn't sure where this conversation was headed. They sat down, and for a moment, the room was filled with an uncomfortable silence. Finally, Emeka's mother spoke. "My son is heartbroken," she began, her tone gentle but firm. "He loves you, Amara. He's willing to do whatever it takes to make this marriage work. But you left without even giving him a chance to fix things." Amara took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "Mama, I didn't leave because I stopped loving him. I left because I couldn't keep living like that. Emeka. He didn't see me as a person. He saw me as something he could control, something he could use whenever he wanted. I tried to talk to him, but he wouldn't listen." Emeka's mother frowned, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Marriage is not always easy, my dear. There are challenges, misunderstandings. But you don't run away from them. You work through them together." Amara shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "Mama, this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was torture. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, I couldn't breathe. Every day felt like a battle I couldn't win. I had to leave to save myself." For a moment, Emeka's mother said nothing. Then she sighed, her expression softening. "I didn't know it was that bad," she admitted. "Emeka. He's always been strong-willed like his father. But I never thought he would hurt you like this." Amara wiped her tears, her voice trembling. I don't want to hurt him, Mama. But I can't go back to that life. I just can't. Emika's mother reached out, placing a hand on Amara's. I understand, my child. And I won't force you to do anything you don't want to do. But I want you to know that I'm here for you no matter what. Amara looked at her, surprised. You're not angry with me? Emika's mother shook her head. I'm disappointed, yes. But not angry. You're like a daughter to me, Amara. And if my son has hurt you, then he needs to face the consequences of his actions. Amara felt a wave of relief wash over her. For the first time since she left, she felt like someone truly understood her pain. After Emika's mother left, Amara felt a renewed sense of strength. She knew the road ahead would still be difficult, but with the support of people like Lola and now Emika's mother, she felt like she could face whatever came next. A few days later, she received a call from her lawyer. We've filed the necessary paperwork for the legal separation, the lawyer explained. But Emika's legal team is pushing back. They're claiming that you abandoned the marriage without just cause. Amara's stomach twisted. What does that mean? It means we'll have to go to court, the lawyer said. But don't worry. We have the evidence you've gathered, the recordings, the messages, the photos. We'll fight this, Amara. You won't have to go back to him. Amara nodded, though the thought of facing Emika in court filled her with dread. Thank you, she said quietly. I just want this to be over. The day of the court hearing arrived, and Amara felt like she was walking into a battlefield. She wore a simple but elegant dress, her head held high as she entered the courtroom. Lola was by her side, offering silent support. Emika was already there, seated with his lawyer. When their eyes met, Amara saw a flicker of something in his expression, regret perhaps or anger. She couldn't tell. The judge entered, and the proceedings began. Emika's lawyer argued that Amara had abandoned the marriage without justification, painting her as a selfish wife who had turned her back on her vows. But when it was Amara's lawyer's turn, the tone shifted. Your Honor, the lawyer began, this is not a case of abandonment. This is a case of survival. My client endured months of emotional and physical abuse at the hands of her husband. She tried to reason with him to make him understand her pain, but he refused to listen. She left not because she wanted to, but because she had no other choice. The lawyer presented the evidence, the recordings of Emika's dismissive words, the messages where he ignored her pleas for rest, the photos of the bruises on her arms. With each piece of evidence, Amara felt a mix of relief and shame. Relief that the truth was finally coming out, and shame that she had allowed herself to be treated that way for so long. When the judge finally spoke, the courtroom fell silent. Based on the evidence presented, the judge said, it is clear that this marriage has caused significant harm to the petitioner. The court grants the legal separation, effective immediately. Amara felt a wave of emotions, relief, sadness, and a strange sense of freedom. It was over. She was finally free. But as she left the courtroom, she noticed Emika standing near the exit. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes bore into hers with an intensity that made her heart race. Amara, he said, his voice low. This isn't over. She didn't respond. Instead, she walked past him, her head held high. She had fought for her freedom, and she wasn't going to let anyone take it away from her. Amara stood outside the courthouse, the weight of the judge's decision still settling in her chest. The legal separation was final, but Emika's words echoed in her mind. This isn't over. She shivered despite the warmth of the afternoon sun. Lola squeezed her arm, pulling her back to the present. Come on, Lola said, her voice firm but gentle. Let's get out of here. Amara nodded, allowing her friend to guide her to the car. As they drove away, she stared out the window, the bustling streets of Abuja blurring into a haze of colors and sounds. She felt numb, as if the reality of what had just happened hadn't fully sunk in yet. You did it, Lola said, breaking the silence. You stood up to him and you won. You're free, Amara. Amara turned to look at her friend, tears welling in her eyes. I don't feel free, she admitted. I feel scared. What if he doesn't stop? What if he finds a way to drag me back? Lola reached over and took her hand. He can't. The court has ruled in your favor. He has no legal right to you anymore. And if he tries anything, we'll fight back. You're not alone in this, remember? Amara nodded, squeezing Lola's hand. She wanted to believe her friend, but the fear lingered, a shadow she couldn't shake. Over the next few weeks, Amara tried to rebuild her life. She found a job at a small boutique, something to keep her busy and give her a sense of purpose. She started attending therapy sessions, working through the trauma of her marriage and learning to reclaim her sense of self. But Emeka's presence still loomed over her. She would see his car parked near her apartment, or catch a glimpse of him in the distance, watching her. Each time, her heart would race, and she would hurry inside, locking the door behind her. One evening, as she was closing up the boutique, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, her breath catching in her throat, but it was only a customer. Sorry, didn't mean to startle you, the woman said with a smile. Amara forced a smile in return, her hands trembling as she locked the door. She couldn't keep living like this, constantly looking over her shoulder, waiting for Emeka to appear. The breaking point came one night when she returned home to find her apartment door slightly ajar. Her heart pounded as she pushed it open, her eyes scanning the room. Nothing seemed out of place, but the feeling of violation was overwhelming. She called Lola, her voice shaking. He was here. I know he was here. Lola arrived within minutes, her face set in a determined expression. That's it, she said. We're going to the police. At the police station, Amara filed a report, detailing the harassment and the break-in. The officers were sympathetic but warned her that without concrete evidence, there was little they could do. We'll keep an eye on your apartment, one officer said. But if he contacts you or shows up again, call us immediately. Amara nodded, feeling a mix of frustration and fear. She knew Emeka was smart enough to stay just out of reach, to avoid doing anything that would give the police a reason to arrest him. A few days later, Amara received a letter. It was from Emeka, but this time it wasn't through his lawyer. The handwriting was familiar, the words carefully chosen. Amara, I know you think I'm the villain in this story, but I want you to know that I never meant to hurt you. I was wrong and I see that now. I've started counseling and I'm trying to change. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope one day you'll see that I'm not the monster you think I am. Mika. Amara stared at the letter, her emotions swirling. Part of her wanted to believe him, to hope that he was truly changing. But the other part, the part that had endured months of pain and fear, couldn't forget what he had done. She folded the letter and put it away, unsure of what to do with it. The final confrontation came unexpectedly. Amara was walking home from work when she saw Emeka standing near her apartment building. Her heart raced, and she turned to walk the other way, but he called out to her. Amara, wait. She stopped, her back to him, her hands clenched into fists. What do you want, Emeka? He stepped closer, his voice soft. I just want to talk. Please. She turned to face him, her eyes blazing. You lost the right to talk to me when you treated me like I was nothing more than a possession. I don't owe you anything, Emeka. Not my time, not my words, not my life. Emeka's expression faltered, and for a moment, he looked like the boy she had once thought she could love. I'm sorry, he said, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry for everything. Amara felt a lump in her throat, but she didn't let herself cry. I hope you mean that, she said. But your apology doesn't change what happened. It doesn't erase the pain you caused. I'm moving on, Emeka. And you need to do the same. With that, she turned and walked away, her head held high. She didn't look back, not even when she heard him call her name one last time. Amara's journey wasn't easy, but with time she began to heal. She found strength in the support of her friends, in the therapy sessions that helped her reclaim her sense of self, and in the small moments of peace she found in her new life. She never forgot what she had endured, but she refused to let it define her. She was more than a victim, she was a survivor. And as she stood on the balcony of her apartment one evening, watching the sunset, she felt a sense of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. She was free. Truly free.